In the animal rights movement, there are many different understandings of what veganism is. Many people believe it to be more than just an animal rights stance. Many people believe it to also be about human health or about the environment or about human rights. And your outreach will be shaped by what definition you operate under. This has nothing to do with our health, because human health is another way of saying human rights, isn't it? We all have the right to pursue well-being, but that has nothing to do with the animal rights movement. When we talk about veganism, we're actually talking about the group of animals that are being oppressed by human beings. This has nothing to do with affection towards animals either. So whether you love animals or however you feel about animals actually has no bearing over their right to not have their rights stripped away from them and to be subjected to oppression. You don't need to love animals. People can hate you as an individual, but they have no right to harm you. So it's the same thing with animals. It is only about justice for non-human animals. That's what veganism is. And in the most summarized way possible for me to say this, being vegan is being for animal rights. We used to say veganism equals anti-animal abuse. And then I had to think about this, and I was thinking, why does it have to be an anti-position? Aren't we for animal rights? And that's why we're against the violations of animal rights: abuse, enslavement, torment, torture, murder, name it. But they all fall under animal rights violations, don't they? So we are for animal rights. That's why we're vegan. Right? And what do I mean by animal rights outreach? Well, essentially, at its base, outreach is speaking up for the victims in the same way that you would want to be spoken up for if you were in their position. Activism is very different from any other thing that you can possibly do in life. Activism is putting yourself in the victim's position of the injustice that you're trying to address. So if you're not doing that, you're not doing justice for the victims. When you speak, how would you like to be spoken for? Your whole function is to be a medium of truth. The truth is not always comfortable. It's not always going to be received well. It is all about being a medium of truth for others. Because truth in this world exists, but it will not come into action unless humans bring it into action by using one of the most powerful tools that we have, which is our voice. And the least that we can do for the animals is use our voice to speak the truth to people. If you aren't speaking up in the same way that you would want to be spoken up for, you're just giving people information. Education and information and stats are only a small part of an outreach interaction if you want to be effective. The core of a successful outreach interaction is to hold the individual that you're speaking with accountable. And I don't need to preach to the choir here, but obviously the injustice that people are responsible for when they're not vegan is the greatest injustice on the planet. There is no greater injustice than this. When people try to say, well, can you maybe talk about human rights because this isn't relevant? Actually, the opposite is true. Is there anything more relevant than this? For all of the individuals that are going through what they're going through, this is insane. This is quite literally the worst thing on earth. I can't think of a worse form of abuse on earth. Can you? Of any being. Holding people accountable is the most effective way to get through to them and to cut through the layers of conditioning that people are subjected to from birth in this society that we live in. Holding them accountable will mirror their character back to them in a society where that is otherwise overlooked and ignored. You're taught not to question it, not to think about it too deeply, and in fact, you're taught to mock veganism. The fact that you are speaking to someone and you have the opportunity to hold them accountable is perhaps the only time that that person will ever have that happen. Just understand that's the opportunity that you have when you speak to somebody. It could be the only time in their lives that they have anyone hold up a mirror to their character. So don't squander that opportunity. Holding them accountable is the most effective. And I'm summarizing the whole workshop for you right now just by saying that. It is the most effective way of getting them to understand that veganism is a moral imperative. And everything else in the interaction is details. If you think you can say things in a particular manner that sounds nice, if you try to schmooze people with sales tactics or political games where you focus on being liked as a primary, or you compromise the message because you think that it's going to sound better, or you pander, Most people will lose respect for you in those interactions. It's about controlling the conversation to the extent that you make sure you're not talking to the wrong person for longer than you need to be. Once you realize that they're not reachable, you wrap it up and move on to the next person ASAP. If you just focus on what you say and how you say it, not to as much of an extent as what you say, but if you just focus on that, then you're doing the most that you can do on outreach. Instead of saying, oh, well, they didn't go vegan, so I failed. Well, how about you just say, well, I said all the right things and I did the most that I could do with my voice. I said all the right things and I said them in a way that was the best possible way I could have said it. And I also moved on from that person as fast as possible so I could make myself available for someone else. That is success. If you think in terms of that for your outreach, that is success. You don't need everybody to go vegan necessarily. Just think of the ones that won't go vegan as practice. What we mean by seed planting is you are holding them accountable, right? Because that is the best chance of a seed blooming. Did you know that chickens are killed at this many weeks? Did you know that calves are taken away from their mothers in the dairy industry? Did you know that? You have to be aware that when you're doing these types of things where you're just giving people information, that if someone is just standing there going, yeah, that's interesting, they're glad that you're not holding them accountable, that you're just giving them information. It's easier to have that type of a conversation than to have a conversation where you're holding them accountable for what they're personally responsible for, right? Because information is just food for thought. You know, when everything is brainy, just understand that it's just food for thought. You know, do you want to give them food for thought or do you want to give them food for action? To give someone a motive to do something, it comes from here. You have to hit them in the chest. I'm not saying that you shouldn't give them any information. That has a place in this approach. Of course it does. If that is the bulk of your interactions with people, where you're just giving them info, then don't expect people to change. And by the way, most of the info that we give to people, they already sort of know. I've had more success doing this approach than any approach I've ever done. People criticize this approach saying it's too aggressive or it lacks compassion, it lacks love for people and all of these things. We're not cursing people out, we're not being assholes to people, we're telling people the truth because we're there to defend animals. And what you also realize is that telling people the truth is the most respectful and loving thing that you can do for people. So it's backwards when people say you should be a bit more loving and compassionate and, you know, informative and all these things. That isn't necessarily love and compassion. This word pandering is also one I want you to get comfortable with understanding the definition of, because essentially non-vegans do this to us as well. They tell us the things that we want to hear so that we don't hold them accountable. Just be mindful of when you're doing it, if you're doing it, and stop doing it. Keep it real with people. Don't say things because you think it's what they want to hear. Tell them what they need to hear. When people say to you, I don't eat much meat anyway, because this is a very common thing that non-vegans love to say to vegans, they're pandering. They eat just as much meat as everybody else in society, but they're saying that to you because they want you to not hold them accountable. Be mindful of that. Pandering is when you are over-agreeable on outreach and being fake for the sake of being listened to or heard. And of course we want to be listened to. But when you're doing something primarily just to be listened to, then you may find yourself compromising on communication integrity. And that's why I'm saying you should not focus on pandering and just focus on telling people the truth. Back to my point about love and compassion. Veganism is about justice. It's not about love and compassion. I touched on this earlier. You don't have to love animals necessarily to uphold their rights, because we all have the right to not be subjected to oppression, simple and plain. We're only talking about basic rights here too. The right to not be stabbed in the throat when you don't need to be, you know, and there's an alternative for you to not be. Your likability doesn't determine your rights, right? Someone can hate you, doesn't matter. They don't have the right to harm you. So veganism doesn't equal compassion. If you don't go around beating children, it doesn't make you compassionate by default, does it? If you walk down the street, you see a dog and you don't kick them in the face, that doesn't make you a compassionate person necessarily, does it? That's not our measurement for compassion, is it? I think that just makes you sane and just. This approach that I'm teaching you basically is pure honesty, you know. Telling people the truth is the most respectful thing that you can do for them. That's what you would expect from your friends, right? You wouldn't expect them to lie to you. Well, how about you extend that moral grounding that you have to the public, to complete strangers? When you're willing to tell complete strangers the truth, something that you would do for your best friend, that is the most compassionate thing you could be doing. Back to pandering. When you agree with everything that the bystander is saying to you, or you're having that type of conversation where you're basically not being real, you're being fake, they will lose respect for you. The best way to earn respect is to tell people the truth, because people understand that it's difficult to tell people the truth. They will also sense that you're coming from the right place when you do this. You're not just trying to be an asshole. You are just trying to defend animals. That will earn respect. If you want respect, you have to earn it. You can't just cheat your way into it by saying things that are agreeable, pandering, compromising, focusing on being liked as a primary, etc. Telling people the truth is the best way to earn respect from people. Stop caring about being liked by people as much as you probably do, because this is a common problem in society. People like people who don't care so much about what people think of them. It works the other way around. If you really want to achieve that, stop caring so much. Again, I'm not saying go out there and just, try to own people and stuff. If you really want to achieve respect and being liked and all those things, tell people the truth and defend animals honestly, in the same way that you would want to be defended if you were in the animal's position. Even if you think that they're just like waving their head and they're not very interested, they're getting a read on you. They'll see that your desire to be validated by them is greater than your desire to defend animals. What I'm telling you is to just put yourself in the victim's position, and also put the person you're speaking with in the victim's position as much as you can. Unless you do that, I don't think it's even possible for people to connect to the sense of injustice that they're responsible for. How can someone really truly understand that what they're doing is wrong as a non-vegan unless they imagine being in the animal's position, in the victim's position? Can anyone explain that to me? If you're just telling people information about cows, chickens, and pigs and turkeys, but you're not having them imagine being a cow, chicken, pig, or turkey themselves, how can they truly understand the moral obligation to stop doing what they're doing? I don't think that any injustice can be assessed properly unless you imagine it from the victim's position. For a long time now, we were one of the greatest transgressors in this regard. The animal rights movement has been conflating human health and the environment with animal rights. The purpose was to hook people in with as much as we can to convince them to do this, and we tell ourselves it doesn't really matter why they do it as long as they do it, because the animals are going to stop being oppressed by them. So let's just get there however we can get there. But I'm here to tell you that when you promote veganism from the perspective of the environment, it being better for the environment, or from the perspective of it being better for human health, if you do get someone to become plant-based, you are creating the worst candidate for a vegan that you can possibly create. Being vegan means being for animal rights. It doesn't mean anything else. So while that sounds like I'm being a purist and being pedantic about the definition, it is important because it pretty much shapes your whole way of communicating about this. The other thing is that the health and environment points have been exacerbated in this movement. If you think about it, most non-vegans already know about how healthy it is to be vegan and how good it is for the environment. So that isn't convincing as many people as we would like, but they already know about it. So why are we talking about it? How about we just be the animal rights message for people, which is what is lacking in this world. When we get to the point in this outreach interaction where we ask, what do you think the number one benefit is of being vegan? Most people will say, well, it's better for your health, or it's better for the environment, which proves we don't need to be teaching people about this. Another thing is people may be responsive to the health and environment points because it is a way of avoiding accountability. It's easy to agree with the health and environment points. Oh yeah, so it's better for the Amazon. Oh, well, that sounds good. So yeah, I'm on board with that. Oh yeah, better for human health. Well, I don't want cancer, so that sounds good. It's easy to agree with that type of stuff, but all of those things, again, is just food for thought. Also, how out of place is it for us to be out there telling people what to eat for their health? Like, how nosy are we to be doing that? Like, that's none of your business. What people do for their health is their own business, isn't it? Last time I checked, we all have the right to be unhealthy or to be healthy. That is our choice. So why are we talking to people about their health? We're not out there as nutritionists, are we, when we're doing activism? We're out there as activists. So let's just play that role. And we're also not out there as environmentalists, not saying that that's a bad thing. If you want to do environmentalist type activism in a different space, a different time, in a different conversation, then by all means, I encourage you to do that. But when you're doing animal rights outreach, keep it about animals and their rights. When it comes to the health questions, if people ask health questions, your job is to establish whether they're being authentic or not about their health concern. Make sure that you've established the ethical part of this conversation well and truly. Make sure you've established the why factor before you talk about the how factor. In fact, the how factor is only a small part of this equation. So the bulk of your outreach should be focused on why someone should be vegan. When anyone is concerned about their health, when it comes to this conversation, that's a how conversation. It's not a why conversation. How to get the proper amount of nutrients on this plant-based diet is an easy thing to address if someone is authentically concerned about that. And if the ethical part of this conversation has been established firmly. So make that the focus first. Make sure that has been established before you get into how much iron you can get from a plant-based diet, etc. Communication skills. When you're talking to people, before you move on to the next point, check in with them. Say, does that satisfy your concern? Does that address your question that you just had? And then move on. Because you want to make sure there's no stone left unturned. When we think that people don't care about the ethics and they don't care about animal rights, we have to be responsible for the way that we communicate, because that's all we can really control. Is the way that you're communicating upholding as much care factor as it could about animal rights? If you start talking about environment and health and pandering and focusing on being liked, then maybe you're lacking care factor for the animal rights message. And maybe that's why most people don't seem to care about it when they're listening to you. People say they're against animal abuse. When you ask them that question, they will... I haven't had anyone say that they're for animal abuse unless they were trolling, so I don't even count that. But for the people that are asked this question, are you against animal abuse? They will say, even hunters will say, I'm against animal abuse. I don't abuse animals. I kill them with respect. And even though that guilt is shared by society, it is one of the greatest crime that I have ever learned about. People will care more about animal rights than you think once you speak correctly and you lay things out for them the way that it ought to be. Another thing that I think has contributed to the fact that people don't care about animals, because we have to be, again, responsible for what we say, is these types of terms like friends, not food. I'm not saying that that isn't true. Of course, animal lovers don't eat animals. Of course that is true. But the message that we're sending with that is that you have to be an animal lover in order to be vegan. That's not necessarily true, though. You don't have to be. You don't need to be friends with them in order to uphold their rights. When it comes to trying to address the severity of this with people, we like to compare to human rights injustices, anything that you can imagine that happens to human beings. And for years, we've tried different ones, different comparisons that you can use to highlight the severity of this injustice for them. But what we've found is the most effective is to just simply put the person you're speaking with in the victim's position. How would you feel about being raped, about being enslaved, about being murdered? How would you feel if it was happening to you? Not if it was happening to children in Africa, women. You know what I mean? It becomes too distant from themselves, and people mostly care about themselves. They only see things from their perspective. That's just the reality of, like, of course they will only see it from their perspective. So speak to that. Speak from a point of view where they can get it. A lot of vegans love to bring up dogs and say, how would you feel if this was a dog? And there are many things going on in the movement to try and highlight this. There's like a page dedicated to this. And whilst I enjoy the content that that page creates, it's, I think, the wrong message, because it's not about whether you can imagine a dog in a slaughterhouse. It's about whether you can imagine yourself in a slaughterhouse. What I sort of touched on this about the info, keeping statistics to a minimum is important, because you can get lost in these brainy debates. Do you really want to open that up with somebody, like a debate about cancer rates, heart disease rates? You will end up going back and forth with people, and none of that really matters anyway, because even if there was no environmental impact for being non-vegan, is it justified? If there was a way they could figure out how to do it totally sustainably, would that be justified? Would our message still have any moral weight and merit to it? Of course it would, right? It wouldn't matter at all regarding the environmental footprint or even the health footprint. If being vegan didn't really change our health whatsoever, we were just as healthy as everybody else, just as likely to get diseases as everybody else. Does that mean that we shouldn't be vegan? Has no bearing whatsoever. Not everybody is worth your energy. Be conservative of your energy because you only have a finite amount of that. If you're trying to do this long term, and I hope that you are, then understand that not everybody you speak to, and this includes your family, by the way, not everybody that you speak to is going to listen. They're not reachable. Accept that. Move on and focus your activism on people who will act. And that's that. Understand the cunningness of non-vegan guilt, the ability that non-vegans will have to waste your vital time while you're at work for the animals. So when people like to bring up excuses and have you running around in circles trying to respond to them, even though they're not listening, they don't even care for your response. Even though you address it emphatically, they don't care. They'll just bring up another excuse. And if you keep running around, yeah, well, that's my response to that. I'll rebut that. Yeah, I can debunk that. And you just keep going back and forth, back and forth. So they're wasting your time and you don't even realize that they've got you running around in circles to drain your energy. And it's basically a psychological attack on you and this movement because they are pissed off that you are potentially making them feel guilty. And that guilt comes from their own values, not your values. So you're just holding up a mirror. And they fucking hate that so much that they're willing to waste your time and in some way or another attack the animal rights message and the movement at hand. Be mindful of when that's happening and put a stop to it. All right, this is going nowhere. I'm going to wrap this up and make myself available to talk to someone. In fact, don't even say anything witty. Just walk off. You don't need to end it with any type of pleasantry. Just walk off. You owe them zero in this interaction. All right, this is going nowhere. Walk off. It is effective to mostly use questioning. Do you think that an animal is a thing when you say something? Or do you think that an animal is someone? Asking them the question gives them a place in the interaction. They are then able to interact with you and think for themselves, to give you an answer based on their own values, instead of just giving them your values. So Socratic questioning is a really good way to address the point you're trying to get across, by asking the question instead of making a statement. However, again, I am not saying don't make statements, because statements are a good way to progress the conversation. So once you have asked a question, and you'll see in the outreach interaction, once I show you the flow of the interaction, there are certain times where you have to make a statement or ask a closed-ended question, which is yes or no, before you can progress. Why versus how? You know, there are many things that we can talk about when it comes to how easy it is to be vegan. You can use Happy Cow to be able to navigate and find restaurants, but you can also use Google, and you can also get as much protein as you need from beans and eating rice, and you know, all these things are how conversations. How is not as important as vegans think it is. Non-vegans either already know how to be vegan, because it's just eating plants, guys. It's not that complex. Or they can easily figure it out by using Google, looking up recipes online, and asking a few questions. They just have to be engaged in figuring this out. And the only way they're going to have a motive to figuring it out is if they're sold on why they need to do it. This comes down to anything, by the way. I'm not specifically just addressing veganism here. This is the human condition. We will not do something unless we're convinced on why we need to do it. Right? If you're trying to take action in your life and change something as horrific as this, especially when it comes to non-veganism and what it leads to for animals, then focusing on why they need to change is where the bulk of your interaction should be focused on. You can get into how at the end of the conversation. You know, if they ask something about how and they're being genuine, perhaps you can ask the question, you know, have I addressed why you need to be vegan though? Are you convinced on that yet? You know, I can get to the how, I can very easily tell you how, but are you convinced on why you need to be vegan first and foremost, right? I'm happy to show you the science on nutrition or show you where you can get it, but are you convinced on being vegan today? and figuring out how. So I'm not just teaching you the principles. Everything I've told you up until this point is the principles of this approach. Now I'm going to show you the outreach interaction from start to end. This is obviously designed for being used at a Cube of Truth. However, you can also use this in any other scenario. So prior to this rendition, the question was, would you like to know more about why we're here? The previous two openings was, have you seen this footage before? And would you like to know more about why we're here? And now we've changed it to, how does this footage make you feel? Because we've found that that gets the same answer anyway. If you're trying to find out if they would like to know more about why you're there, you'll get that answer when you say, how does this footage make you feel? You'll get that answer. You'll also get the same answer when you, instead of asking, have you ever seen this type of footage before, you'll get a good idea of whether they've seen this footage before based on their answer to this question, how does this footage make you feel? Now, the reason also why we use this opening now is because it starts things off here in the chest. Getting lost in the brain too much is not a good thing. The brain is heavily conditioned by society's programming. The heart is pure and recognizes truth for what it is. So we want to get into the emotion. Again, I'm not saying to not also give people information and facts. That is important. Also, veganism has logic, has rationale, has reasoning, has the facts to go along with it also. But what I'm trying to say is that if you really want to change somebody, you have to start with the emotion. Now, most people will respond to this question and say that it makes them feel sad, it makes them feel bad, it's ugly, right? How can anyone really, if they're being intellectually honest, view what we're showing on screens at Cubes and say, this doesn't bother me whatsoever? Most people who say something like that are trolling, and that's usually a sign for you to move on and not deal with them. But most people will say, this makes me feel bad, it's sad, it's horrible, etc. If they say that, you progress on to the next step. Now, if they are trolling and they say, it makes me feel hungry, I'm going to go to KFC right now, that's cool, wrap it up, move on. If you want, you can give them a second chance by saying, is that really how it makes you feel? Just to establish if they're being honest or not. And if they continue on with their game, then just wrap it up and move on. You know that you're not talking to someone reachable, so they've saved you time. You don't need to carry on that conversation any longer. Just move on. It's the same thing with people who seem to genuinely not care. They just be like, yeah, whatever. Again, you're talking to someone who's not reachable. Ask them once more, is that how you really feel? You just don't care? Then if they say the same thing, move on. The second part of this process is giving them some information, because you want to educate them somewhat on what they're watching on the screens. So then you would say, what we're showing you on the screens is the standard practice footage of what happens in the meat, dairy, and egg industries and other industries that abuse animals. We're also showing you humane certified, and given that you're in Australia, this applies to you. You can also say this is RSPCA approved. But for those who are watching this workshop back, it doesn't really matter if you say that part. You can just say what we're showing you is also humane certified. Most people appeal to free range and humane, and so that kind of addresses it from the start. The second step is to solidify their position on how they feel. So we ask them the question, is it safe to say that you are against animal abuse? And I already foresee in the next rendition of this workshop that animal abuse may be updated, because I feel like the word abuse is too soft of a word to describe exactly what is happening to the animals. So I've sort of started practicing with torment and torture. Are you against animal torture? And I'm playing around with different things, but if you guys have any suggestions, I'd love to hear it. So is it safe to say that you are against animal abuse? Again, most people will say absolutely, without question, 100%. Of course I am against animal abuse. Most people are emphatically against it. Again, if they say, nah, I'm for it, you're talking to a troll, wrap it up. If they say, well, I'm not really against it because I eat animals, that is a really good sign that you're talking to someone who is reachable. So that's the other reason why I'm teaching you this approach of just getting to the point with people, Don't play games, just get directly to the point, because people already get this. This is pretty obvious stuff. So once you have established that they are against animal abuse, you'll move on to the next step. Number 3, do you think it's possible to be against animal abuse while eating animal products? Or you could say consuming animal products, because that would include wearing leather and fur and other things. Do you think it's possible to be against animal abuse while consuming animal products, such as meat, dairy, and eggs? People will either say yes or no to this, because that's a yes or no question. And if they say no, I don't think it's possible, that is a good sign, because they're addressing the hypocrisy early on in the interaction. They know that it's not possible, therefore you're talking to someone who's being intellectually honest and has maybe thought about this somewhat up until this point. If they say, yes, I do think it's possible, it's important that you question how exactly it's possible in their minds. How exactly are you against animal abuse while eating meat, dairy, and eggs, for example? How does that work exactly? Well, and this is where they go with this usually, well, it could be done humanely, right? And that's when you remind them, we're showing you humane certified right now. Does this look humane to you? How do you exactly slice an animal into 1,000 pieces humanely? And then if they still don't get it, put them in the victim's position. How do I slice you up into 1,000 pieces humanely? How does that work? Can you explain that to me? That's where the circle of excuses part of the interaction comes into play. I'm not going to get into how to address each of the excuses, because they're all pretty straightforward and you probably already know how to do that. If you have any issues with any of that stuff, let me know and I can help you, either in the Q&A or at another time. It's so easy to address them. What I want you to focus on is addressing them as quickly as possible and getting back to anchoring accountability into the conversation. Once you address plants not having feelings, so how does that justify you not bringing it back to them and their individual responsibility as soon as possible. And basically all of these excuses come from human supremacism. And just remember that you are in control of the conversation, not them. You're in control of the conversation. And don't let them at any point take control of the conversation. Sure, let them speak, let them ask their questions, but you are the one directing the conversation. You are the one controlling where it goes. Ask the question, does this satisfy your concern? Are you happy with that answer? Once you've gotten that answer from them, you can move on. If you haven't gotten a clear answer from them on that, that means that they're not really asking that question for an answer. Once you have established that they are satisfied, you move on to the next step. What do you feel is stopping you from being vegan as of today and no longer abusing animals? They should be able to say, well, nothing really is stopping me. This young kid, he said to me, I won't be in the cool club anymore. Society will disown me. I won't be cool anymore. And I thought that was really honest of him to say that, because there is societal pressure around not being vegan. Again, that question sort of mirrors their character back to them. Are they just subscribing to society's norms and a drone that follows everybody else? Or are they someone who thinks for themselves? Do you know what the number one benefit of being vegan is? And most people will say the environment or their health. If they are sold on why they need to be vegan, and then you find yourself talking about the environment or the health points, by all means, go ahead. But I don't think that that should be brought up at any point until that is achieved. Some people will say it's better for the animals or something along those lines. They'll understand that this is about the animals, and that is a good sign. Regardless of what they say, they may not say anything. They'll be like, well, I don't know, you tell me. For the animals, again, we're bringing in the perspective of the animals. For the animals, they're no longer harmed in any way because of you. You're no longer the reason that animals suffer unimaginably. And for you as an individual, the number one benefit is when you say that you're against animal abuse, you'll no longer be a hypocrite. And after you say that, really pause. That's the realest thing that you're going to say in the entire interaction, calling them out on the hypocrisy, which is not just hypocrisy, it's the ugliest violence that they could be responsible for. Let them really soak that in for a moment. I like to then follow that up by saying, is that fair? Do you disagree with that? Again, I'm checking, and I like to check in throughout the entire interaction, find out where they are in the interaction before I move on. And many people do this approach of all walks of life, different shapes and sizes, in different countries. And it rarely ever happens that someone will respond to this point by saying, oh, like, fuck you, and then starting to get violent with you or whatever. So just delete that from your mind if that's what you think is going to happen. You're just pointing out something that is for the betterment of the animals, defending the animals, but also for them, because they shouldn't be living in hypocrisy, and also they shouldn't be animal abusers, especially when they say that they're against animal abuse. If you were in their position, how urgently would you say this needs to end? This is an important question to tie in the urgency, because most likely if people are convinced up until this point, they will say at the end of the interaction, I'm going to eventually become vegan, I'm going to try, I'm going to think about my actions more, or I'm going to reduce, which means they don't understand the urgency of this, do they? So that's why we ask this question. If you were in their position, how urgent would you say it is for this to end? Most people will say very urgent, unless they're trolling. Again, if they're trolling, wrap it up. Clearly, it's urgent. The last step is, after our conversation, are you going to stop abusing animals and be vegan? This is a closed-ended question. We need to get a solid answer from them on what their stance is at this point. This is a moral obligation for them to take action. And this is the closing statement that you can leave with them. At this point, you would offer them a card, and you'll say, would you like a card? And it's important that they say yes to that. If they say no, don't give them the card. Now, just remember, this is not food for thought. This is a moral obligation, what we've talked about today. But if you're not convinced, for whatever reason, in being vegan as of today, go to that link on the card. Watch the rest of this documentary that we're showing you on the screens. Watch this lecture by Gary Yourofsky. He's convinced millions of people to be vegan around the world. Listen to what he has to say. And then the closing line that we like to use is, for as long as you take to go vegan, animals will be abused and killed because of you. Just remember that. Hello, how does this footage make you feel? Yeah, it makes me feel horrible. It's bad. It's hard to watch. What we're showing you is the behind-the-scenes footage of the meat, dairy, and egg industries and other industries that abuse animals. What we're also showing you is humane certified. Is it safe to say that you are against animal abuse? Yes, I am. Of course I am. Do you think it's possible to be against animal abuse while consuming animal products such as meat, dairy, and eggs? Well, no, I don't think so. It's hypocritical. Yes, that's right, it is. And then you carry on. Or if they say, yeah, I do think it is possible. Could you explain how? Usually their explanation won't make any sense because they're speaking about it in terms of it being outside of themselves. So then you would say, what if this was you we were talking about? Would it make sense? What do you feel is stopping you from not abusing animals and being vegan as of today? Do you know the #1 benefit of being vegan? If you were in their position, how urgent would you say this needs to end? After our conversation, are you going to stop abusing animals and become vegan? And then that closing statement, you can get someone to acknowledge the moral obligation that they have and to reach a vegan conclusion in 7 short steps. Do you guys want to see another example, or should we move on to the Q&A? All right. What do you think?
It's cool. Yeah.
You think the footage is cool or we're cool?
Both.
What do you think is cool about the footage?
I think it's definitely moving.
Yeah?
It's definitely like inspiring in a way.
Inspiring.
As in like it would make me change. And I also like the way you're showing it, like with the people holding it.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And what about you? How does the footage make you feel?
It makes me feel bad.
It makes you feel bad.
Yeah.
Are you both against animal abuse?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And this is clearly animal abuse?
Clearly, yes.
These are the standard practices that are carried out in the meat, dairy, and egg industries. This is actually claimed by the industry themselves to be the best of the best in terms of their practices. What you're watching is farms and slaughterhouses that are labeled RSPCA approved and humane certified. Do you think this is humane?
No.
No. Do you think it's possible to be against animal abuse while eating meat, dairy, or eggs?
Yes.
How so?
Like I say, it's possible to give the animals the best life you can before eating. Like, for example, if you're gonna eat chickens, you want to let them be free range. Like when I eat eggs, I have free range eggs because I'm like 100 chickens per hectare. So yeah.
How old are you?
I'm 12.
Wow, you know a lot about this stuff for a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Do you live out on a farm or somewhere out in a rural area?
Just live out in the suburbs.
So how do you know it's a 100 hectare ratio?
Because I think when I'm buying eggs, I think I'll be careful about what eggs I buy.
Okay.
Because I've seen stuff like this and it's
Okay.
pretty bad.
Okay, I'm going to be forthright with you. When I first started to address eating animals, I was looking at it from a health perspective, and I went down the road of trying to purchase free range. But what I was missing that whole time was the perspective of the animals. So if you think about those chickens on that free range farm, would you like to be any of those chickens? Because you have to understand the entire process. You would have your brothers stolen away from you, separated at birth. Your brothers are going to be thrown through a blender while they're 1 or 2 days old because they don't lay eggs. Okay, that's the start of the cycle for you. And then as you get older, while you're living out on a pasture, and this is only in a very minute circumstance, most farming is not like that. Okay, but even if you are talking about a small scale farm, you're going to be living out in a pasture, but you're held there against your will. You're being held captive, quite literally as a slave. Okay, you might be fed on time each day. You might even be given a name. But why are you there? You're there to be exploited. And eventually, in fact, it doesn't even take that long, you get murdered. While you're at a fraction of your lifespan, you'll get a knife slit across your throat. Because all of the chickens who lay eggs on a free-range farm, no matter how small the scale is, are murdered. They're all enslaved. They're all tormented, even if it looks like they live a good life on a pasture. And that's the truth. What I'm telling you is the objective truth about what happens from the animal's perspective. So would you like to live that life? Or would you rather not be put in that situation to begin with?
I don't know. I think rule of instincts, which where you want to live, have to live as best as we can.
And what about the animals? Do you think they have a will to live?
Yes, I think they definitely want to live. And if someone said, it's hard to deal with the chickens. Like, it's hard to ask them what they think. But I don't know. I think I'm still gonna eat meat, but I'm gonna try and do it as humane as I can.
So you've used the word humane. What does humane mean to you?
Try to give the chickens a good life.
What does the word humane mean to you?
Well, kind of like, I don't know really.
You don't know?
No.
It means to show compassion or to be benevolent. Do you think it's compassionate to enslave? And I'm just giving you the standard practices that occur in all situations. There's no way you can avoid what I'm telling you. Enslaved, tormented, and murdered. How do you murder humanely? Now, you know what would make this easier for you to understand? Imagine yourself in the animal's position. How do I murder you humanely?
No electric shocks. I don't know.
Think about the question again. Okay? You're the victim we're talking about here. Is there a humane way for him to be murdered? In this instance, I could tell that she was getting it. She hasn't said anything really in this interaction at this point, but the way that she was looking at me and nodding her head, I could just tell she was getting it. She knew that his answer was off the mark. So that's why I brought her into the interaction at this point and asked her the question. This is also a way of engaging everyone in the group that you're speaking with, to make sure you're not just speaking to one person, you're engaging with everybody. I'm asking you now, just so you can help out maybe. There isn't, is there? Why do you say that?
Because, as he said, they have the will to live, and no one wants to get killed.
Yeah, he's not consenting to being killed, is he? He's not saying, yes, I'm okay with being killed. You wouldn't say that, would you?
No.
I'm involving her now because maybe that can help you out, hearing it from her as well as me. It's just common sense that if you were in this animal's position, you would not find this acceptable. Even if you were killed painlessly and quickly, you value your life. You don't want your life to be taken.
I think if I were to die, I think I would like to die being eaten than just dying in a bush.
At a fraction of your lifespan? And are you saying that if you're in their position, you would actually prefer that? You would prefer to live like a chicken
No, I prefer
on this planet?
human.
Yeah, exactly. You would prefer to live as a human. So what do you think is harder? The choice as a human being to be vegan, or the lack of total choice that the animals have? Because they don't even have a choice, do they?
No.
What's harder, being a human being and making the choice to be vegan, or being a chicken, a pig, a cow, a turkey, or a fish? Yeah. Yeah. It's super easy to be a human being and be vegan, isn't it? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Am I missing something here, guys?
No.
Yeah. So do you know what the number one benefit is for being vegan? Can you take a guess?
Like you're saving animals' lives.
Yeah. What do you think it is? That as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it will help like the industry to not like produce as much meat.
Yeah. Because you're no longer demanding,
Yeah.
and they are supplying demand. That's basic economics.
Yeah.
You're one less person who's demanding it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me put it to you this way also. The number one benefit for the animals is that they're no longer tormented, abused, and harmed in any way because of you.
Yeah.
You're no longer the reason that animals suffer immensely, are tormented and murdered.
Yeah.
The benefit for you as individuals also is that when you say you're against animal abuse, you'll no longer be hypocrites.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you disagree with that? Does that sound fair to you? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Yeah? So what do you think you'll do about this then?
Try and eat less meat. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe even stop eventually. Stop.
Okay. Now, just to wrap this up and I'll let you guys go, is what you're seeing on the screens, is animal abuse and injustice to each of you?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Would you take the position that you just took with any other injustice? Let's say you're the victims in this scenario.
Yeah.
Would you find it acceptable for your oppressor to try to harm you less and to do less harming of you? Or would you want them to stop entirely?
Stop.
Immediately.
Yeah.
So please don't compromise when it comes to these non-human animals, because they suffer just like you would if you were in their position. In all the ways that matter, there's no difference in our capacity to suffer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you wouldn't compromise, if you were the victim, then do the same thing for them.
Yeah.
Okay? So now what do you think you'll do?
Stop eating meat.
Yeah. And not just meat, dairy, eggs. Yeah. Do you know what veganism means?
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
No. Like animal produce and all.
No animal products as well, like wool. You see that the UGG store? I'm going to leave you with a card, and I appreciate you both stopping.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm also just going to quickly tell you what's on it. So if you guys aren't yet convinced in being vegan as of today, after speaking with me and seeing the truth of what happens in the meat, dairy, and egg industries and other industries, then I want you to watch that speech at the top, which is called The Best Speech You Will Ever Hear. It's free to watch on YouTube. It's by a guy named Gary Yourofsky. And if you are game enough to watch the rest of what we're showing, these are scenes taken from this documentary called Dominion. And you can watch that on YouTube as well. It's free.
This is impressive. You doing this? I respect that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that. If you guys ever want to join us and get the word out, please do. Once you become vegan, you say that this is impressive, but if you don't want to necessarily do this form of activism, that's also fine. But just speak up whenever you have the opportunity. Say something about this, because their voices won't be heard until we speak up. All right, thanks for stopping, guys.
Is like what do you say to people when they ask you what your biggest show of them? It's like sensationalized, or if like you blown it up and made it a lot worse. It's like what's a good response to that?
You could just ask them what they think happens in these industries. How do you kill an animal without How do you do it humanely? Right? How is it done without abuse, without violence, without horrendous violence at that? So that's as simple as it is to address that. Does that satisfy your question?
Yeah, I guess so. It's always comes up when I'm at work, like particularly like my workmates, and they're always like, "This is overly sensationalized. Like, I'm doing a lot worse than it actually is."
Right. So then ask them how they think it happens.
Yeah, I think I have put it back on them, and then they kind of just like squirm their way out of it. And I'm like, oh.
That doesn't sound like someone who's open then.
Yeah, well, like there's a bit of interest initially, but like I can see they probably they don't kind of squirm out of it. So I'm like,
Yeah.
completely. It's not bad.
Yeah, so put them in the victim's position. If you were in a slaughterhouse, like how do you think it's going to happen? Do you think you're going to be tickled all the way to the kill line and then you're just going to be killed quickly and painlessly? Because that's not how it happens. And even if that did happen, is that humane for us to be doing that? Is that acceptable? You know? So again, like if they're open, that should be enough to satisfy their concern.
Do you think it's useful or effective to bring it back to the animal life that we've taken because of environmental destruction? So not really playing into what about the environment, but just like we consider the animals' lives that are taken to destroy that land for animal agriculture. So then it's an animal rights issue.
Yeah, I think that's the only case where it's acceptable. Yeah. And the reason why I'm hesitant now to even go there, whilst I think that's the most valid way of doing it, the reason why I don't go there is because when people say they care about the environment and then if they seem to care about the environment, they usually only care about the environment as much as it impacts humans. And more selfishly than that, they only really care about the environment as much as it impacts them and their families maybe. So they're not going to care about what's happening to deer. You know what I mean? The rainforest being cleared because it kills animals like orangutans. And they're not really going to care about that as much as they're going to care about how much the environment might impact them. Does that make sense? That's sort of why I'm hesitant to go there, because I don't want to play into human supremacism. However, if they do seem to care about that, wildlife and whatnot, then yeah, by all means, I think that's a good point to bring up if you are going to talk about the environment, because then you are talking about the animals and how much humans are impacting the animals. So I can't be against that.
I liked what you said in your workshop too when that was brought up, and you answered it with the animal rights issue is so big, it's now affecting the environment.
Yes, I said that. Yeah, I said that in Melbourne. Yeah.
That's why I use that line. It's now so big. It's
Yeah.
a big issue.
Yeah.
But now you're worried about the environment as well.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's. Thank you for bringing that up. The issue of animal rights is such a problem in society. There are so many animals that are being enslaved, tormented, and murdered that it has, of course, consequently become an environmental and a health issue. That's the only reason why they are issues of that extent, because the animal rights issue is the core of the problem. That's how much it's been overlooked. That's why I focus on this approach now, because I want to address the root of the problem. I don't want to address the symptoms of the problem, right? The root of the problem is the fact that animals aren't having their rights upheld. Their rights are being violated, and to such an extent that it bleeds over into environmental destruction and into the destruction of human health. Of course it's going to do that when it's done at the extent that it's being done.
Is there meaning of age of the people who's thinking, because those guys in their 20s?
Yeah. Obviously, they need to be able to have a conversation. If they're too young to be able to do that, then I would say really basic stuff. I'd give them a toddler version of the approach. Yeah, this is bad, isn't it? You don't like hurting animals, do you? You shouldn't eat them then if you don't want to hurt them. You just say what you can to get it through to them. I like talking to kids though. I don't shy away from doing that. The footage is graphic, of course, but I think everybody needs to be shown this stuff. So
I got someone the other day that she was really interested in the sign that I had, but then her parent went and covered her eyes. I'm like,
yeah,
well,
that's
I
common.
said, excuse me, did you just cover her eyes?
Yeah.
She goes, oh, she doesn't want to see it. I'm like, actually, she's been looking at it for a while. So if it's too bad to see, then you're the one that's actually...
Yeah, that's exactly, that's the route. This isn't right. Surely this is not okay for it to be happening if you don't want your kids to see it. It's all fun and games when it's a Sunday roast, isn't it? Right? But when we show you exactly what that is, people want to get angry at us for showing it to their kids, you know? So the life of an activist is uncomfortable because we're addressing an ugly truth for people, but we have to do it, otherwise we're not doing it effectively. Obviously, we can't hold people accountable to the point of forcing them to be vegan, and if we could, this workshop would be very different, because I'd be teaching you how to force people to be vegan instead of talking and using your voice. People at the end of the day have to choose to hold themselves accountable for being vegan, and the best way to do that is to hold them accountable to the greatest extent that you can with your voice and making the points that we make.
They got me to then use the upset the industry and the government.
Yeah.
And told your lies, which actually leads me down a good path. Because that's why we're here, to show what they don't know.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I was in the Gold Coast doing a cube, and it was one of the worst cubes I've ever done in my life. We actually got through to nobody the entire time, and this lady who seemed really sweet in the beginning, this like older lady with her daughter, she's like, "Oh, what's going on here?" She's really sweet, and I was like, "Oh, okay, this is going to be good." And I said, "Oh, I can tell you what we're doing here. Oh, yeah, what we're showing you is the." I think I started saying, "How does this make you feel?" She's like, "Oh, well, what is this?" And I said, "What we're showing you is the standard practice footage of what happens in the meat, dairy, and egg industries." Before I could even finish saying that, she said, "Oh, fuck off," and then walked off. And I was so surprised because I thought she was a sweetheart.
As long as it's convenient for them, they'll be okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And her daughter was embarrassed, I think, because she was like...
How many, like, you were just saying then you didn't get anyone, how many, like, on average do you normally get, or is it you just don't really pay that much attention, or is it,
To be accurate, I have to say I don't know, because you never know, right?
No, yeah.
Yeah. But I'd like to keep somewhat of a tally in my head. Like, I spoke to 4 people, and they were so down. Like, they really got it. But it could have been more. It could have been less.
Yeah. Okay.
On average, it's probably 5, 4, 3, around that. Yeah.
Haven't we, like, we've had weeks where we feel like nobody stops, and then some weeks, and it doesn't matter sometimes when there's not much foot traffic, lots of people stop. It doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason how many good interactions we have.
Yeah, but I will say this city is one of the best in the world. Yeah, really understand how good it is that we have it here and take advantage, because Melbourne City is brimming with all walks of life, and that location that we have been using for the last 6 years now on a weekly basis couldn't be a better location in Bourke Street Mall. Even if you get bad people to talk to and trolls and stuff, it's easy to then like find good people, you know, very soon after that. So, yeah, but sometimes we seldomly get people stopping, and it is what it is. It's part of the work that we're doing. So, yeah. Yeah. We used to have a tally that we kept at the end of each cube. Would go around and say, "How many did you get? How many did you?" But then too many people were lying, and we're just like, "This is stupid." Like, some people would go, "Oh, I got 43," and I'm like, "You got 43? I got 2. How is that possible?"
It's just weird because you're supposed to say it again, so do you think you will go vegan? You know, like we had to ask the question.
Right, yeah.
I mean, the approach was strange, but
Yes.
it's a step in the process. Just refining and getting better.
Yes. Yes.
What's your measure of success? Like, how do you, like, what makes you say if this person's going to turn? Like, is it them committing to you on the spot? Like, how do you know that's just not just them trying to
So
type it up?
that's a really good question. It used to be, will they say that they're going vegan? But the reason why that's no longer the measure is because they may say that they're going vegan and not do it. In fact, I've seen that play out many times. The best way to measure whether you've had a successful interaction or not is, did you say the right things, right? Did you execute saying those things correctly? And did you speak to the right person? Did they seem reachable? When you ask the question, does that satisfy your concern? When you ask the question, what are you going to do about this? Are you going to stop being an animal abuser and become vegan as of today? based on the responses they give you, are they reachable or not? And you can use your best judgment. I'm sure you'll gather whether you think that they've got it or not. And that's the best that you can do. What you say, how you say, and who you say it to. If you do those things correctly, you're being successful. You're having a successful outreach interaction.
Did you ever get angry?
Fuck yeah. Yeah, I have days where I shouldn't even be at the Cube. I have certain days where I actually should just leave because I'm on the brink. I don't think that I would be as effective as I am as an activist if I wasn't angry, though.
Yeah.
That anger is what fuels me to be effective. And what I've found is when I put my anger into effective activism, and the more effective I am in my activism, the more fulfilled I feel, which actually brings about more positive energy into my life than all of that negativity that comes from just being angry at the situation. So it's turning shit into flowers when you do that. Yeah. I think it's a natural response to be angry. Of course we should be angry.
So, I mean, how do you convince those people to join AV?
Do you think...
Last 5 months, I haven't seen a single person joining AV. Since I've
you ask them, do you think that the animals need to have a voice, have someone fighting for them? Have you ever thought about fighting for the animals? Have you ever thought about doing outreach on the streets? Did you know that you can join us?
Exactly. We need to ask people because I've seen people around us who don't actually like to ask, who say that no, it is not everybody's cup of tea.
Yeah.
But I do ask every weekend, who's not an activist, that why don't you join us?
Yep, you should. Yeah, that's what we should be doing with all vegans,
Yeah.
getting them engaged in some way. Some people might say, oh, I don't know about this approach. Okay, well, do something else. Social media, whatever.
Stickers.
Yeah, whatever it is that you think is do art.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.